Hi, today we're going to look at the first part of the industrialization unit. Um, so, roughly like the time period from the 1860s to the early 1900s. When we talked about the railroad industry, things like the Pacific Railway Act, we're looking at ways in which the government was funding these railroad companies to build the transcontinental railroad. The railroad is going to be instrumental in the development of industry in this country. So we'll talk a little bit about the importance of railroad, and we'll also talk about a political group known as the Populist Party that came about as a result of the railway industry and how quick and how fast it grew and how powerful it became. So first, let's talk about the title we see here called the Gilded Age. Sometimes when we talk about the Second Industrial Revolution from the 1860s to early 1900s, this time period is referred to as the Gilded Age. If something is gilded, it means it has a thin layer of painted gold on it. It's not real gold, but it looks like it's gold. And that's kind of like sums up the industrial era itself. There's a lot of good things that happened, but underneath the good, there's a lot of negative things that happened too. So, as we discuss this unit, as we talk about industrialization and we talk about urbanization, we'll also talk about some of the negative impacts of those developments too. Um, so, like I said, today we'll focus on the railway industry and we'll talk about the populist movement. So, railway itself, um, with the development of railroads, we see more land being acquired by the railway companies themselves. Remember, under the Railway Act of 1862, uh, the government was incentivizing railway companies to build the transcontinental railroad, and to further incentivize them, they would also give them tracts of land next to the railways themselves. So almost 200 million acres of public land was distributed to the railway companies from the government. And by 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad is completed, connecting the East Coast to the West Coast. So this was a huge development, and it sets the tone for industrial growth. So as we get more and more railways and more networks are just a series of connected rail lines. Um, as we get all the development in railways, we see more increase in demand for coal and iron, steel, basically the raw materials that go into producing finished goods. So large profits are starting to be made across the board in industries. It leads to the development of small western towns. They start to grow into cities. People start to move out west more because there's more options for jobs as a result of the railway industries and a result of the raw material industries. Certain cities start to develop and specialize in specific goods, looking at the geography of where certain cities are, where they are in relation to like the Great Lakes, what sort of mining access they have, what sort of minerals, what sort of access to timber. So cities are starting to specialize. Um, and they weren't just limited to production and sale within their own town or city. With the railway, they could ship it across the country and then get it to the coast and then ship it around the world. So it's really rapidly increasing and expanding the influence of American business and industry. Travel by rail gets better. People are more attracted to the option of it. It's not this really uncomfortable sort of transportation mode anymore. They become more safe. There's a lot of safety improvements like the air brake. The cars themselves become more luxurious and more comfortable, like the Pullman sleeping car. Um, because we can travel much faster with rail, there's a need to develop time zones. So they come up with 24 time zones around the world, and to keep the shipping kind of on track and keep times on track as you go from one part, say the East Coast, to like say Chicago. We have to have a coordinated time system to keep things shipping efficiently and effectively and on time. So the development time zones. Um, the working conditions for railroads were pretty rough. There's a lot of hardships. If you're, developing these rail lines out west, you're going through mountains, you're exposed to the heat, the cold, whatever else. It's dangerous work as you're, using TNT to dynamite holes through mountain passes and whatnot. There's not a lot of safety measures put in place to ensure worker safety. A lot of discrepancies in pay. Typically, white male workers were paid more and provided more options like food. Minority groups like the Irish and the Chinese were paid less and were not given other options. So accidents were common, disease, um, the occasional Native American attack. Um, but without the Chinese or the Irish, a large portion of those Western railroads probably never would have been built in the efficient manner in which they were. So they were instrumental in the development of the railway system. And with the development of railroads, we start to see uh, the industries of natural resources starting to increase, mainly like kerosene, petroleum, oil. Um, these are essential resources, products for industry itself. Oil is going to be instrumental for running machinery, the factories themselves. Kerosene is important for a fuel source, for heating source, and for lamp sources. Of course, in the 1880s, once electricity becomes a thing, kerosene, lamp oil takes a dip. But then eventually we get automobiles, and like that ramps up the need for kerosene and oil products again too. So oil is going to be pretty consistent and a pretty steady uh, and important industrial area in this country. But with the development of these industries, we start to see environmental effects as well. So there's no regard for conservation yet at this point. There's no concern about pollution or dumping the byproducts or waste products of industry into rivers, lakes, and whatnot. So we quickly and rapidly see the deterioration of our environments. Um, as these cities are growing, uh, the water sources, drinking sources for these cities that they're relying on are often contaminated and polluted from the industrial waste in their own backyards. So eventually, we start to see some progressive efforts to sort of cut back on the pollution and sort of conserve some of our natural resources. But that's still an issue today. We still see issues about pollution, and we're still trying to find ways to prevent destruction of our resources, natural resources, in our environment. But this second industrial revolution really ramps up um, the rate in which things are polluted and destroyed. So as the railway develops, they become pretty powerful because so many industries rely on them to transport their goods. One group that kind of gets left out here is the farmers. There's not a whole lot they can do to fight back against the prices that the rail companies are charging. Uh, if they have a bad crop or they don't produce as much, obviously they're not going to make as much profit. And then you throw on top of that the fact that the railway companies are charging these high rates, it really puts the farmers in a tough position. So the farmers created this political group called the Grange, and it was trying to push the federal government to control the railroad industry, to try and manage the prices and make it more manageable for farmers to still do what they need to do and still make a profit. They felt that the railroad industry was too corrupt, it was too powerful, they were too greedy, essentially. And they were looking to get the government to focus more on the settlers, on the farmers, try and distribute some of the land grants more evenly. With the Homestead Act and the Railway Act of 1862, most of the time the big businesses and industries were the ones that profited from those laws. Um, so the Grange and the farmers are looking to see some more equity. They're looking to see more return um, on their hard work and labor and not sort of be subjected to the railways' high prices. Um, so they're just looking for more government regulation, more government control the uh, over the rail industry. So they're looking to pass laws that would establish maximum freight and passenger fees. Um, they were also creating other agencies like the Farmers Alliance. Um, They're trying to implement different projects and initiatives to help out other farmers. Um, and they were successful to some extent. The government does start to regulate a little bit, but the industrialists are pretty powerful. They're pretty wealthy, and there's a lot of pushback from the wealthy industrialists, the oil, the railroad companies, and eventually you get a Supreme Court ruling with the Wabash Pacific Railway Company versus Illinois. And the Supreme Court says that the state could not set rates in interstate commerce, only the federal government could. Um, and of course, the big industries are working with the government, and it kind of sets back the farmers in terms of them gaining more control over those rates. 1887, Congress passes the Interstate Commerce Act. So now the federal government is given the right to supervise railroad activities. They created the Interstate Commerce Commission, which is this government agency that oversees the railroad industry. So the farmers were kind of excited about that. However, it doesn't actually do everything that it was supposed to do. It wasn't as strong as it needed to be. So it's kind of like this agency or this government program that just didn't have enough power. So to also fight back, we get another group known as the Populists in 1891. And again, their goal is to target the railroad companies to weaken those large industrial businesses, and so that the farmers and the people out west would have more likelihood of prospering. Uh, the populist group, it's this small grassroots sort of movement. You get a lot of people out west who support it, but in terms of national politics, uh, it's not as popular as, like, say, the Republicans or the Democrats were. Um, the populists were again looking to stop the railroads from charging higher rates. They also wanted to see a shift from a gold standard to a silver standard. Uh, the populists believed, like, if there was more money in circulation, if there was more silver in circulation, it's cheaper money. It puts more money in the pockets of farmers, so they would, have better financial success in that regard. The problem with more money in circulation is that it leads to inflation. It does lead to higher prices. But the farmers felt like if they had higher prices, they could sell their farm goods at those higher prices, and they'd be better off. And most of the wealthy industrialists supported a gold standard, which would put less money in circulation and which would actually see their profits increase. uh, Politically, the populists pushed for a one single term for president and vice president. They wanted a secret ballot. They wanted a popular election of senators, meaning they wanted the people to directly vote for their senators and not a small group of wealthy individuals, powerful, connected people that would get to select the potential people who would become senators. The secret ballot, of course, is making your vote secret. It's not out there open to the public. They're also pushing for an 8-hour workday, and they're also looking to restrict immigration because they felt that the immigrants were limiting job opportunities for people already out west. And so again, here's just a quick little chart that shows the difference in views of the gold standard versus the silver standard. So your rich, wealthy bankers, industrialists, railroad people, those were your gold bugs. And your farmers, laborers, populists, those were your silverites. And again, the main thing here with the silverites, looking for cheaper money, looking for their products to be sold at a higher price. And of course, the gold standard with your industrialists, they're looking to um, make more tight money, make the money less money in circulation. So the populists would continue to sort of fight and struggle with the wealthy industrialists throughout the late 1800s, and the early part of the 1900s. But eventually that movement kind of dies out, and the wealthy industrialists and the railroad companies sort of rule the day. Again, there's government actions, the Interstate Commerce Act and the ICC, they're all looking to regulate, but really they end up serving the purposes of industry and the railroads.